Um, our speaker today, Frank Rose, holds an MA in history from Loyola University in Chicago. After living and working in Illinois for a number of years, he and his wife, Linda, moved to the Auburn area in 2014, perhaps, Frank, somewhere along in there. 13, and have since been active members of OLLI. Frank has studied military history his entire life and has traveled to various locations important to both the European and Asian Pacific theaters of World War II. He's taught numerous classes for OLLI, including World War II in the Pacific, the atomic bomb and the end of World War II. He's also taught a class in children of World War II who have been a part of the class to tell their family stories relating to that war. Some of you know Frank as the perennial coordinator for Dr. Kicklighter's history classes. Some of Frank's lectures are available, I believe, on his YouTube channel. Frank has contributed to historical preservation efforts relating to World War II, including helping to bring the U-505 submarine to the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, his former home. Today's Brown Bag Talk relates to Frank's trip to France last summer for the 80th anniversary of the D-Day commemorations in Normandy. Frank Rose.
Well, first of all, thank you all for coming. That was and thank you, Ken. That was a very nice introduction. I certainly appreciate that. As always with my lectures, they will start with these words: please turn off your cell phones. So those of you who know from Dr. Kicklighter, that's always what I say. So please turn off your cell phones. Well, I called this presentation D-Day, June 6, 1944, a battle that shaped our world. And that's for a very specific reason, because I think this is a battle that shaped our world. But in 1944, I believe there were three battles that shaped our world. The first of those being Ichigo. Ichigo is the largest Japanese offensive in World War II. It takes place in China in 1944, and it is an incredible defeat for the nationalist Chinese and Chiang Kai-shek. Many historians, myself included, believe that the defeat of the nationalists in this battle leads directly to Mao and the communists becoming in taking over the country in 1949. And of course, that is a battle that will shape our world with the China that we know today. Secondly, I would talk about a battle called Bagration. And Bagration takes place in Belarus. It is a huge Soviet offensive. It starts on June 22nd of 1944. And that offensive will completely destroy the German Army Group Center. This will be the largest defeat of military history of the German army, much more so than Stalingrad. The issue is with that actually is there's 28 German divisions out of 34 are completely destroyed. And my opinion is after Bagration, there is absolutely no way that the Germans can win World War II. Well, what does that lead to, of course, is the offensive gets all the way to the outskirts of Warsaw and will be a factor in why the Soviets will control Eastern Europe. And of course, when they control Eastern Europe, that will be what Winston Churchill refers to as the Iron Curtain. So that is why I believe that is a battle in 44 that shaped our world. Well, that brings us to D-Day. And I believe fully that D-Day shaped our world for similar reasons. But let's talk a little bit about what's going on at that point. So in 1944, the Germans control almost all of Western Europe. They don't control all of Italy because Italy has been knocked out of the war in 43. And of course, the Allies, the Western Allies, are fighting in Italy at that time. But all the rest of Western Europe is under German control. So they have a front that runs all the way from Norway all the way down to Spain. That's a lot of ground to cover. And they're going to do everything they can to defend that ground because they firmly believe that, of course, we will try to make an invasion. The United States actually wanted to make an invasion as early as 1942, which my opinion is, had we invaded France in 1942, would have been a complete disaster. But that's another story. So that's what we got going on. They got to defend this. And some of the reasons they know to defend this is because of two raids that took place in 1942, one at Saint Nazaire, and more importantly, one at the French port of Dieppe. And at Dieppe, what occurs is they're trying to get control of a port. The British want to capture a port temporarily and see what that would look like. Well, it's a complete disaster. But it also makes Hitler aware that they've got a problem. They've got this giant coastline that they need to defend. And he begins to think of, and remember, he always thinks of things in World War I kind of a mentality, that it's got to be fortifications and trenches. And so he wants to build what's called the West Wall. In other words, to make a fortification that runs all the way from Norway all the way to Spain. That is a big thing to cover. And they start building this thing, and it's not going particularly well. And what he decides then is he needs someone to ramrod this program, and he brings in Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, famous from the Desert Fox. And Erwin Rommel will then become basically the point person to build this Atlantic wall. And Rommel has a couple thoughts on this. He thinks that what has to happen is that they need to stop us on the beach and crush us on the beach so we never can advance inward. Because the fact is, he believes that our air power is so potent, which he's experienced in Africa, in the Western Desert, that they will not be able to bring troops up fast enough to expel us at this point. So his idea is build the fortifications and put troops very, very close to the beach so that they can then drive us into the water. Well, the commander actually of this whole area is a man named von Rundstedt. And von Rundstedt says, oh, no, this is all wrong. This isn't what you need to do. Because quite honestly, if you try to do that, that's not military. It's not sound militarily. Because the idea is he who defends everything defends nothing. So what Rundstedt wants to do is he wants to make a mobile German force, a large strike force, so that when we get away from the beach, then they will swoop in and crush us then. Thinking, too, as far as the beach goes for Rundstedt, is he says that our naval power is so potent with all those battleships and cruisers firing on the troops that they won't be able to push us into the sea. They need to defeat us on land. So that's two separate ideas going there, and the Germans are basically going to do both of these at the same time, which is actually never a good idea. Well, Hitler says, though, well, you know, we still need to build this Atlantic wall. So they begin to build this wall, and it's going to be a massive thing. They're going to have giant concrete bunkers. They're going to have lots of obstacles, and you can see in this lower picture, and this is pretty critical, is you'll see hedgehogs. And the idea of those hedgehogs is simply this, is that when the tides come up, they will be underwater. So they will snag our landing craft, because the Germans are under the impression that we will never, ever land at low tide, because that whole beach becomes a giant kill zone. There's nowhere to hide. You're going to advance with no cover, and it's going to be many, many casualties. And so the Germans never believe that at low tide we will attack. So they put a lot of effort into stopping landing craft when the water is high, 18 to 23 feet, like I say. So that is a huge, huge issue. Germans have another big issue. They're running out of men. With all the losses they've had since 1939, particularly on the Eastern Front, those forces are thinned out. So the average age of a German soldier by this time is 6 years older than an American soldier. What are they going to do? Is they're going to try to enlist other people to fight for them. And they will refer to these people as Eastern Legions. They will take Polish prisoners of war, Russian prisoners of war, people from Turkestan, people from all over. You can see in the top picture in that's known as a Tobruk, by the way, that concrete fortification. Those people are from India. They're fighting to free India from British rule. So they're trying to enlist all these people. The problem with this is, particularly people they're taking from Poland and Russia, they're in prisoner of war camps. And they're starving to death in these camps. So the Germans come up and say, hey, you want to fight for us, we'll let you out of prisoner of war camp, and guess what? We'll feed you. And of course, these people are like, let me see, I can starve to death, or I can go fight for the Germans. Well, of course, they're going to take the fight for the Germans. But are these highly motivated troops? Absolutely not. Their motivation was to get out of prisoner of war camp. Also, the Germans are running out of equipment. So they begin to arm these people with captured French, captured Belgian, captured Czech, whatever they can scrape up to arm these divisions of these Eastern legions. So they got another problem. They're not well armed. They're not well trained. They're not motivated. So these are all big issues for these German troops. So all they're really suited to be is static divisions. They're suited to stay on a beach and fire out of a bunker, because you don't need a lot of training to fire out of a bunker, believe me. You need a lot more training to take a bunker. So that's the situation for the Germans at this particular point. They are in a very, very tough situation trying to create this Atlantic wall and having enough troops to defend this giant area. Well, I think one thing that's never talked enough about is mines. One of the things that Rommel is totally counting on is deploying millions and millions of mines. Now, fortunately, he doesn't deploy as many as he had hoped before our landings in June. So the first one I want to talk about is the Teller mine. That is a large anti-tank mine. But what the Germans are going to do with it is they're going to put it on a log that will be actually underwater when the tide is up, and they'll mount that thing on top of that log. And so when a landing craft comes along, you can't see it, it's underwater, boom. Damages the landing craft, it's not sinks it. Then on land, they're going to have a thing called the shoe mine. The shoe mine is a little tiny box. It's a little wooden box, not very big. What the shoe mine does is when you close that lid, if you step on that lid, it will detonate the mine. There are 7 ounces of TNT in that mine, and it will blow your foot off. But that mine is built for a purpose, is that it has almost no metal. And at this time, to detect mines, they would use metal detectors. So this mine is built to defeat metal detectors. So how do you find this mine if you don't have a bulldozer or a mine flail? Well, you crawl on your stomach with a bayonet and you poke the ground in front of you looking for this mine because you don't want to push down on it. So the whole purpose of these landmines is really this. It's to slow you down. It's to make you afraid to advance. It's to keep you on that beach because that beach will be a kill zone. And then the last mine I want to talk about is a thing called the Bouncing Betty. Now, my father hardly ever talked to me about World War II, but he did tell me about the Bouncing Betty. And if you look at the top right picture, you'll see 3 prongs. So the mine is buried in the ground. Only those 3 prongs are exposed. If you step on the prongs or trip over them or whatever to activate that mine, 3 or 4 seconds later, that mine will detonate. The reason being is it doesn't want you to be on top of that mine because what's going to happen is there's a lift charge. And that lift charge is going to blow that mine out of the ground. When it gets waist high, it's going to detonate. And you can see in that picture, in the cutaway, all the steel balls that are in that mine. So it'll spray the area with steel balls. It's a very, very deadly weapon. You can see the gentleman holding that mine. What does he have? He's dug it out with a bayonet. So you can see the whole idea of these mines is to slow you down, to make you afraid to advance. Well, a couple things. And I think really we need to look about the advantages that the Germans have. So the Germans have, I'd say, 3 big advantages. And quite honestly, the 3 big advantages are this. They have the Atlantic Wall. They have what's known as interior lines of communication. So they can move troops and tanks and everything on roads and railroads, which is far easier than trying to bring them onto a shore and then moving from there. They also will defend ports because they know that ports are critical to our ability to have logistics to support a landing. Well, if you can't hold a port, what are you going to do? You're going to destroy it. And the Germans are going to destroy these ports if they're going to be captured extremely thoroughly. So they have a plan in place. So three big advantages: the wall, interior lines of communications, and of course, the ability to destroy our ability to have logistics by destroying the ports. Allies have three advantages. First and largest advantage, of course, is we can attack anywhere we want up and down that coast because they can't defend, we have mobility, we have ships, we can go anywhere we want. And that whole 1,000+ mile stretch. Big advantage. Second big advantage, and to Rommel's point, we have air superiority, if not nearly air supremacy over that area. So we can interdict the Germans and we can put a lot of air combat power against any counterattack and to aid the invasion. And lastly, what we have is we have the capability of intelligence. There is a very, very large number of resistance people in France, in the Netherlands, in Belgium, that are all willing to give information to the Allies because they want to make sure that they get rid of the Germans because they're not happy having German occupation, believe me. So that's a key piece too. So those three things, and always look at this in this lecture, that this is a race. On a macro scale, it's a race for the Germans to get troops and tanks and everything they need to destroy our invasion. The race on the Allied side is to build up enough force to defeat that. So always you've got this struggle to get more and more supplies and men and troops in place. That's always what this is about. So one of the ways we're going to help to confuse the Germans is we're going to have the tools of deception. And I love this quote by Winston Churchill. He goes, "In wartime, truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies." And indeed, we are going to lie. And so we're going to have two pieces. We're going to have fortitude north, which is to convince the Germans that we will be invading in Norway. And we're going to have fortitude south, which will fool the Germans into thinking we are going to attack at Pas de Calais. Now, Pas de Calais is the most logical place to invade. It's only 20 miles on the coast. It's 20 miles across the English Channel from England to Pas de Calais, the closest point basically there is. Pas de Calais has an excellent port. And also, Pas de Calais is close to Germany. If you land at Pas de Calais rather than land in Normandy, you're 200 miles closer to Germany than you would landing in Normandy because they're west and south of where you need to be. So the Germans, they know this as well. It's nothing mysterious here. They say, well, we better protect the hell out of Pas de Calais. And indeed, they're going to. They're going to have a vast majority of their defenses and an entire 15th Army stationed at Pas de Calais, thinking that that's where we will attack. Well, we're going to convince the Germans that that's where we're going to attack because what we do is we create this thing called the fictitious, we don't call it fictitious, First American Army Group. And the First American Army Group basically doesn't exist. But what it is it's radio communications. It is, I love this picture of this rubber balloon tank. So we have balloon tanks there, and the idea of the balloon tank is the German reconnaissance planes fly over, they see this thing, and they think there's a lot of tanks there. Well, there's a lot of balloons there, but there's not a lot of tanks. And we have George Patton, the famous general. He's given speeches, and there's all this stuff going on about this First Army Group that doesn't exist. This is incredibly successful. So successful that the Germans actually believe that the landing in Normandy is fake. It's a feint. That actually it's just to get them to draw troops there, and because then this giant First Army group is going to launch an assault at Pas-de-Calais. And it keeps the Germans for 7 weeks deploying all of their forces. So it's a tremendous success, and we do fool the Germans pretty well. Well, another tool of invasion is going to be bombardment. And I always talk about this race and how important this race is. Well, if we could destroy the German railroad system in France, the French railroad system, really, if we can destroy that, they are not going to be able to move troops as much and supplies as they would like to. So we are going to take our strategic bombers and we are going to bomb French rail yards. Big problem. French rail yards are in the middle of French cities. And what is going to happen if you do this is you're going to cause a lot of French civilian casualties. The estimates are as high as 40,000 Frenchmen will die with this program. The Allies reach out to the French, de Gaulle, etc., and say, this is what we'd like to do. What do you think? And the French sign off on it. They said, yes, this is what needs to occur because we need to free France from the Germans. So they sign off on this program. Well, there's another big problem with this, though. Because our strategic Air Force, the 8th Air Force, the British Bomber Command, what the people that are known as the bomber barons or the bomber mafia, they don't want to do this. They're like, no, this is not how to win the war. We need to win the war by destroying German cities. We need to win the war by destroying German factories. This is totally the wrong thing to do. They get overruled. And in April, Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander, gets in charge of these strategic bombers, and they begin this program. And again, it's highly successful. We cause a tremendous amount of damage to the French railroad system. Unfortunately, though, about 10,000 Frenchmen are going to be killed in this program. Less than the estimates, but still a sad situation where 10,000 Allied civilians are going to be killed to try to stop the Germans. Well, I talk numerous times about ports. Well, if we can't capture a port, well, why don't we just bring one with us? That's exactly what they're going to do. They're going to bring ports across the channel. They're going to make ports on the French coast. And how they're going to do that is with the famous mulberry harbors. And you can actually see remnants of the Mulberry Harbor at the Gold Beach in Almaranchas, if you should go there. And you'll see these giant caissons and structures. And what they did was they brought 1.5 million tons of stuff across the channel, and they sink it in the water. And then they also brought in, I believe, 64 block ships. So they take these old ships, including old battleships, and sink them to create a breakwater. Now, those of you familiar with Lake Martin and floating docks, what they're going to do is they're going to make giant floating piers because, again, that water is going up and down 18 to 23 feet. So these piers go up and down on giant poles, and they are incredibly effective. It really is amazing because this is the only port that we're going to have, because when you try to capture a port, the Germans are going to try to destroy it, and it'll be inoperable for a long time. So you've got all this stuff. And they're going to open 2 ports. Mulberry A is going to be at Omaha Beach, and Mulberry B is going to be at Gold Beach, which is a British beach, and Avalanches, like I said. And the beach at the Mulberry at Omaha will actually be destroyed in a storm. It's only open for about 2 weeks, but it does provide a significant amount of support at that time for 2 weeks. The one at Gold Beach will actually be in operation for 10 months and will be our primary port to get men and troops and materials onto the French continent. So it's a pretty amazing structure to build this thing and to be as successful as it was. Now, also, even though the structure is destroyed at Omaha Beach, we still bring in a ton of stuff in Omaha Beach using landing craft, for example. So I don't want to give the impression that this was the only way to get product in there. but this is certainly one of the key ones. And you can see the numbers there, 500,000 vehicles, 2.5 million troops, millions of tons of supplies. This is successful, extremely successful. Well, you got to get those troops onto the shore. And the way to get those troops onto the shore is going to be a landing craft. And this is the famous LCVP, the landing craft vehicle personnel, and one of many that they use, but this is a very common type. And it's also known as the Higgins boat. And Eisenhower says, Andrew Higgins is the man who won the war for us. If Higgins had not designed and built those LCVPs, we never could have landed over an open beach. The whole strategy of the war would have been different. And indeed, these are critical. So the way this works is you bring these over on a big ship, you lower them in the water, and then men crawl down on nets to get into this thing. Now you can get 32 soldiers into one of these LCVPs. It looks pretty darn crowded, and it is. And oh, by the way, you can't sit down. You're standing. Now, at Omaha Beach in Utah, we land these things 11 miles out. So they are going to, first you got to get them in the water. Then they got to get full of guys. Then they like to sail around until they get organized, and then they go in. It takes about 2 hours once you get in that thing to get to the beach. So all this time that you're trying to get onto the beach, you're cold. Believe me, it's cold. It's wet, and you're breathing diesel fumes. And many people get seasick, and there's not a lot of places to vomit there, so you basically vomit on your friends. So, is this a comfortable situation? Absolutely not. 32 soldiers can fit on one of these. Now, well, it's slightly more, but that is what they use at D-Day. So, anyway, it looks disorganized. It's not disorganized. It's incredibly choreographed. It's been practiced numerous times in England. Everybody knows exactly where they're supposed to be on that LCVP and these landing groups, and they know exactly what they're supposed to do when that gate comes down. It's been practiced. Problem with LCVPs, though, is they're not armored. They're certainly not bulletproof. And when that gate goes down, of course, it wouldn't stop a bullet anyway, but you are now a big target, okay? And you're packed in. So this is a huge problem landing on a beach in an LCVP because of the density, and it will cause immense amounts of casualties at U.S. beaches. Well, this is the whole plan for D-Day. And we're going to land in Normandy, which again is south, but this map is oriented west is to your left, east is to your right. And you can see that they're going to land on 5 major beaches. These beaches stretch 50 miles. So this is a gigantic enterprise. On the first day, the intention is to land 176,000 troops on this beach. That is a lot of people. Also, it's a multinational event. It's going to be the U.S., it's going to be the British, it's going to be the Canadians. There will be a French commando unit. And then right after D-Day, a French division will land and a Polish division will land as well. So it's multinational, and it's a group effort, let's say it that way. Well, first thing that's going to happen is we're going to use airborne troops. And airborne troops, there will be 23,400 of these guys landed the night before D-Day's. That D-Day is actually, it's just the night of. So they're going to land first. And we look first at Utah Beach. And that's all the way to the left there. And we'll see that the 82nd and 101st Airborne are going to be the first guys in for the U.S., and they are going to land right behind Utah. And the reason they're landing right behind Utah is the Germans have come up with an idea of how they will defend Utah. What they have done is they've flooded the area behind Utah Beach. So in order to get off Utah Beach, there's only a few causeways. And the Germans feel, well, this will be easy to defend because they can't advance except up these little causeways, and we can rush troops in and stop them. Well, the way to get around that, of course, is we're going to put airborne troops in there as well. And so now those Germans are stuck between our airborne forces and the 4th Infantry Division landing at Utah Beach. Utah Beach will be incredibly successful. And I'd give the credit primarily to the airborne forces who take severe losses. And the airborne forces are also going to capture a town called St. Mary-Glisse. And when they capture St. Mary-Glisse, that is the first town in France that will be captured on D-Day. Well, then we have Omaha Beach. Now, Omaha Beach is only 4 miles wide, and it's heavily defended. And what we are going to do is we're going to overwhelm the Germans with combat power. We're going to land 2 full divisions simultaneously on that little 4-mile stretch of beach. So you'll see the 29th Infantry Division and the big red one, the 1st Infantry Division. Then going further to the right or to the east, you see the British will land at Gold Beach. Oh, but I forgot. Remember that Omaha is to be a mulberry harbor. Gold Beach is to be a mulberry harbor. Then you have the Canadians at Juneau. Then you have the British at Sword. And landing behind the British at Sword, again, for the same kind of purpose, is going to be the British 6th Airborne Division. And again, same idea. They're going to capture bridges. They're going to open roads. And that's the idea there is that will help them advance to take what's the critical piece here is the road network behind this area. You see I have a big black circle for the city of Caen. Then to the left of that, I have a big black circle for the city of Bayeux. And then up there, I have St. Mary-Glisse. Notice that these are all on this road and rail network. That is what the Germans will use for a counterattack. Well, in Caen, the paratroopers, the British paratroopers really do a good job, but Caen is not going to be, these are all, excuse me, are to be taken on day 1. On D-Day, they're going to capture all 3 of these spots. Well, they don't capture Caen until July 19th, I believe. So that's 6 weeks later. So that's a problem. So the Germans have the 21st Panzer Division by Caen. That's why it's not captured on the first day. Bayeux is not captured on the first day, but is captured on June 7th, the next day, which will help us link up these beaches. And then, of course, like I said, St. Mary-Glisse will be captured that night. Now, if we go all the way to the top, you see a big red circle, and that is the port of Cherbourg. That is a key thing that they want to capture. They want to capture a port. Well, we do capture Cherbourg eventually, but the Germans have destroyed it so thoroughly that it's not opened for us to use as a port until the middle or late September. So that's why it's so important to have those mulberry harbors. Those ports are critical. So that is the basic overall plan for D-Day. Again, 176,000 people on day 1. Now, for the purposes of this lecture, I'm going to focus the rest of this lecture pretty much on Omaha Beach, because Omaha Beach is the one place that came so close to failure. And I think that is really important to talk about Omaha. Remember, Utah was extremely successful. The British Canadian beaches were relatively successful. Omaha, not so much. Well, this is the plan for Omaha Beach. And if you look again, oriented, the 29th Division is to the west or to the left. The 1st Division is to the right or the east. The 29th Division has never been in combat, but they're extremely well trained. They've been practicing for basically 2 years to launch this invasion. So much so that they are used to train other divisions in this landing process, particularly the 4th. The 1st Infantry Division is all combat veterans. Well, except for the replacements. Little exaggeration. But anyway, they're a combat veteran division. They've landed in North Africa. They've landed in the Mediterranean. And quite honestly, they think they're getting a bad deal here. They've got a bad attitude about this because why are we doing another invasion? We shouldn't be doing this. Just send somebody else. It's their turn. So there's really kind of an attitude problem with the 1st Division, and I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but so much so that they fire their commander, Terry Allen, etc. So it's a big deal before this takes place. Well, all right, so now we see I got a big blue arrow up there. The current moves to the east. And then you see where each one of these companies are supposed to land. This is the first wave. So that's about 1,800 men. The first wave doesn't land anywhere primarily where they're supposed to land because of the current, and they almost all go to the east. You can see where they're supposed to go, and then you can see the big cluster on the right side where they actually end up. So this is going to cause a lot of chaos. Another piece to see here is when they do land is there's a big piece of beach because we are going to land at low tide. Germans do not expect this, of course, and also the Germans don't expect us to land at all on June 6th because the weather has been so terrible. So the Germans really aren't prepared for this. And this is helpful because, again, now there's a micro race that we're going to try to win. We're going to try to defeat the Germans before they can reinforce that beachhead. Because on that beachhead, there's only about 1,200 Germans, 1,200. There's thousands more behind the beachhead, but right on the beach itself, there's hardly anybody there comparatively to what we're landing, which is approximately 30,000 soldiers. Now, that doesn't happen all at once because the first wave is about, like I said, 1,800 guys. So this first 1,800 guys is coming in. They get up on that beach. They got to cover that ground. And then when they get to the beach and start to get off the beach, they hit a thing called the shelf, which I'll show you. And then there's the bluffs. Well, the bluffs are quite steep. They're so steep, in fact, that trucks and tanks can't get off the beach going up the bluffs. So what I've done here is there are what's known as 5 draws. And the draws are basically places that are caused by erosion for water to get off land and get down onto that beach. So I've got those highlighted in yellow. Those 5 draws are what needs to be captured on day 1. Because if we don't capture those 5 draws on day 1, our trucks and tanks and everything are stuck on that beach. And when the tide comes in, that beach is getting smaller and smaller. And it's more and more dense, and it's more and more of a kill zone. So that's the idea. So once we take those draws, we can get tanks and trucks off the beach and begin to move inland and capture that big red line, which is the road network. And that's critical because that, of course, is what the Germans will be using to send in reinforcements. Well, one thing to note here, you'll see those little red humps with little red lines. Those are German fortifications. And they're big-time fortifications. Now, notice that the Germans, not being foolish, realize that, well, what do we need to do? We need to capture those draws. So those defenses are on sides of those draws. That's where the primary German fortifications are. And then you also notice that I've listed them on the right side under the 1st Division, because these are the ones I'll mostly talk about, as WN 65 to WN 60, which stands for Widerstandnest. That is the German name for the fortifications. And again, there's a lot of concrete and steel reinforced concrete to make these things. So these are critical positions that we need to take. Now, that's not saying that the space between those is not fortified. Of course it is. It's full of landmines. It's full of barbed wire, anti-tank ditches, and machine gun nests. So I don't want you to get the impression that the only fortification there is those Widerstandnest. But the Widerstandnest are not particularly well defended. Again, they don't expect us. So, for example, WN 62 is only going to have 25 men in it on the morning of D-Day. That's all that will be there. So again, this whole 4-mile stretch is only 11 to 1,200 Germans right on the beach. And we are going to overwhelm them with massive amounts of force. And then 2 names I put on here so you see where they are, because I will talk about them in detail. The name Woodson and Monteith, all the way to the right. So kind of try to remember where they are, because I will talk about their action on this day. Well, I call this the greatest show on earth, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But the idea here is that we have going to drop a lot of little bitty bombs, 100-pound bombs. I've seen the 100-pound bomb may seem like a large bomb to us, but actually in World War II land, that's a little bitty bomb. And they're going to deluge this area with little bombs because we're going to send in 450 B-24 Liberator strategic bombers to drop bombs on this little beach, 4 miles. Well, a couple problems with that. First problem is B-24s have never been used in this manner. B-24s are strategic bombers. Now, when a B-24 flies over a German city to attack a factory, for example, let's say they miss the factory by 3,000 yards. Well, guess what? You still drop bombs on a German city. Well, here, because of the precise timetable, remember, we're always trying to win that race. We're going to have everything scheduled really close. So those guys in the LSTs that are in the LCVPs that are landing, they're out in the water at 4:30 in the morning. They're going to land at 6:30 in the morning. That's 2 hours. By the time these guys come in at 6 a.m. when they get enough light to see what they're doing, those guys in those LCVPs are only 3,000 yards out. So if you miss by 3,000 yards short, you're going to have fratricide or friendly fire. That puts a big crimp on how these bombers are going to operate. They're concerned about this. They're afraid to do this because they're afraid of causing casualties of our own folks. Well, another problem comes up. These bombers use bomb sights. They bomb visually. It's cloudy that day. They can't bomb visually. Now they've got to bomb by radar. And that's much less precise. So now they're more afraid of hitting their own men. So what they do is they delay their drop. And almost no bombs land on Omaha Beach, virtually zero. What they do is kill a lot of Norman cows, I would assume, but that's not what the goal was here. So that is a huge problem. Well, if you look at the lower picture, that's a B-26 bomber, and that's in the 9th Air Force. And that B-26 bomber, what it's going to do is going to be used in a much different way at Utah Beach. And at Utah Beach, those guys are going to come in under the clouds. They're going to have much larger bombs that are able to really do damage to German fortifications. And because they're coming in low, they're going to take casualties, but they're also going to accomplish their mission. Much more so than Omaha, which they've basically accomplished nothing. So that is a major, major difference between these two beaches. Bombers low, hit their targets, are effective. Bombing high with radar, not effective. So that part of the bombardment is a complete failure. And why do I call it the greatest show on earth? It's because General Omar Bradley visits the 29th Division and says, you know, you men should consider yourselves lucky and be congratulated. You have a ringside seat to the greatest show on earth. So in effect, he's promising them that it's going to be a walk-on. Don't worry about it. We're going to blast those Germans. It's not going to be a problem. This is going to go great. Well, it goes anything but great. And so there's going to be a naval bombardment. And again, because of that time schedule, it's only going to start a little bit before 6 a.m. because they can't see anything. It's dark. And they're going to fire on the Germans for 35 minutes. Because again, they don't want the Germans to reinforce. So they've only got 35 minutes to do as much damage as they can. Now they got 2 battleships, 2 cruisers, and 12 destroyers, which is a good amount of firepower. But it's only 35 minutes. So let's look at Iwo Jima. At Iwo Jima, yes, sir.
Saying that about the ability for that 35 minutes. What do you mean reinforce? Would reinforce during that while they're under fire?
But no, the longer the Germans have to reinforce, the more they're going to have time to bring troops forward. Now, they won't reinforce under the bombardment, of course not. But remember, the bulk of the German forces are behind the beach. They're not on the beach. They're in towns several miles away. So The whole idea is to keep them from advancing to get down into those fortifications. That's the goal here. Is that clear for you? Okay, so they got 35 minutes. When we're at Iwo Jima, of course, at Iwo Jima, the Japanese can't reinforce Iwo Jima because it's surrounded by the United States Navy. And the Navy says, well, we'll bombard Iwo Jima. Now, remember, Iwo Jima is roughly the same size as Omaha Beach. It's only 8 square miles. It's 5 miles long, and some parts it's less than 2 miles wide. So Iwo Jima, about the same size. Well, they're going to bombard Iwo Jima for 3 days with naval fire. And the Marines wanted 10 days, and they're denied. Got denied. Well, anyway, so those guys are not given what they wanted. But again, look at the difference here. You got 3 days of assault with naval guns versus 35 minutes. Big problem. So again, it's not going to be particularly effective. Well, then we've got another secret weapon though, and that's the LCTR, the Landing Craft Tank Rocket. And what they're going to do is they're going to take an LCT and put 1,085-inch rockets on this in racks. And they'll sail these things up and launch this massive amounts of rockets. They've got 9 of these on the beach. So it's going to unleash 10,000 plus rockets in just a matter of minutes. And the idea of this is that will destroy the landmines. It'll destroy the barbed wire. It'll shock the Germans, and they are going to fire these things only 3 minutes before the soldiers are going to land. So that's going to be a tremendous deluge of fire on those Germans, and it's going to be a huge problem for them. Well, these things aren't aimed. And you can see one, I've got a picture in the lower part, it's firing a barrage of rockets, and you can see that cloud of rockets coming up off of that. Well, it's not aimed. So the way you aim these things is you steer your ship close to shore. When you think you're at the right distance, then you fire these in big banks of rockets. And basically they cover a giant area if they're effective. Unfortunately, at Omaha Beach, they're not close enough to the beach. So virtually all these rockets fall in the water in front of the guys coming in. So now you're in a hell of a situation because the bombardment from the aircraft has been failed. The bombardment from shore to shore from the ships has been inadequate. And the secret weapon of the landing ship rocket has been a disaster. This puts these guys in a huge, huge bad situation. So let's look at what the German fortifications actually look like. This is a picture I took of a WN-62. Now notice the guys on the top. And notice the thickness of that concrete. And notice also that 80 years later, that thing's still in pretty darn good condition. So how much did it get affected by our bombardment? Not very much. Another thing to note is there's no aperture or way to shoot out of it in the front, shooting out towards the beach. The way you shoot from this thing is from the sides. So that makes it much harder to see, and you could put dirt and stuff up on the front of it much better. Well, so WN-62, this is just one of the bunkers from that complex. Remember, they have 62, 63, 64, etc. This bunker and its compatriots for WN-62 is armed with one 50-millimeter anti-tank gun, 275-millimeter cannon, by the way, of Belgian design. Also, it has machine guns, flamethrowers, and mortars. Just this one bunker. But again, it's only 25 guys in this bunker. So it's not real well defended as much as it could be if they could rush more troops up. That's going to be a problem. The other issue with these things is firing from the side, they shoot down the beach. And also, as I said, they put them on each sides of the draws. So WN-64 provides interdicting fields of fire for WN-65, also covers the draw. WN-65 does the same thing. It protects WN-64 with interlocking fire. So excellent plan, excellent defenses, and again, virtually untouched by our barrage. Now, how many of you have seen the movie The Longest Day? If you've seen the movie, please raise your hand. Okay. How many of you seen Saving Private Ryan? Just as many or more. Well, let me tell you this. Saving Private Ryan is much, much more accurate than The Longest Day as far as what happens at Omaha Beach. It's not a pretty picture. So this picture tells me a lot. When I look at this, I can see a lot in here that it's going to explain what is actually occurring at this time. So we see here a Higgins boat, an LCVP that has just disgorged its 32 men. And you can see they're advancing in the water. And the water's a long way off. And you can see that right now they're up to their waist in this water. Now, we've all been to the beach, I'll bet, and we've all tried to run in the water. Can you run really fast in that water?
No.
No, you can't. Oh, by the way, you're cold. You've been standing up for 2 hours and you're seasick. Now, if you look further up in the picture, you see that now they're up to their shoulders. So what has happened is this has landed on a sandbar. So the water is actually much deeper. In many places, by the way, this is like the second wave. This isn't the first wave, this picture. Just want to make sure that's clear. So now you're advancing, and some people start to drown. Well, also notice that I've circled the size of the pack on that gentleman's back. These soldiers are carrying 80, 60, 70-pound packs, depending on what they're equipped with, into this battle. It's mighty damn hard to run with that on your back. It's mighty hard to keep yourself from drowning with that. Yes, sir. A lot. There were a lot of munitions in that package and a lot of cigarettes. Yes, sir.
I'd say that if a man lost his balance with 70 pounds on his back and he went under, he couldn't come back up.
To your point, they throw it off. Not only do they throw that off, but they throw their weapons away. Not only do they throw their weapons away, they throw their radios away. Now, I got out of the water. I'm under fire. Remember, those German defenses are perfectly good, right? There's no issues there. You see, I think that's a tank, that rectangle I have in the center there, because the tanks were to precede them. By the way, 27 of the 29 floating tanks sank at Omaha Beach. They weren't particularly effective, but many of them then, there were 64 total, were landed by LCTs, landing craft tanks. So there were tanks on the beach. Not all of them sank. That's kind of a misnomer, really. And you can also see that long rectangle, that is the German underwater defenses. I wanted to give you an idea of how far they have to advance once they get out of that water. Open beach, no cover. Germans are right there shooting at them. This is going to be a disaster. And it is a disaster in many ways. So I get out of the water. I'm in trouble, and I'm going to try my best to get to this. This is the shingle. This is a little tiny ridge on the beach. So this can be 200 to 400 yards of open beach before I get to there. Now I get there. My friends have been killed and wounded. I'm in shock, in effect. My leaders are dead or wounded. I'm disoriented, and I'm hiding under this little thing. Now, there would be no foliage there. And I'll show you that in a minute. And also, the Germans know I'm going to go there. And so the Germans have sighted this in with artillery and mortars. And another little problem, you can barely see it there, but there used to be a lot more. We cleaned much of it out. It's covered with rocks. So when an artillery shell or a mortar shell lands into those rocks, it's going to be fragments everywhere. Now you're hiding under there. Up at the top, you can see a monument and people standing on it. Right under that monument is one of the WN-62 bunkers. So you can see almost invisible. To the left, you can see the WN-62 bunker that I showed you a picture of previously. But everybody wants to get to this shingle. And one more piece here, is I keep talking about those tides. You can see where the high tide point is and the discoloration of the sand from the water and the seaweed. So when the tide is high, there's almost no beach there. So trucks and tanks and everything can't get off that beach until we capture those draws, and then they can get out, but they can't get out until that point. Until that point, this becomes a smaller and smaller and denser kill zone for German artillery and mortars and machine guns. Again, this is not going particularly well. Well, I wanted to show you this picture because this gives you an idea of what this actually looked like in 1944. This was taken the day after, on June 7th, and you can see the 2nd Infantry Division beginning to land. The 2nd Infantry Division is going past Widerstandsnest 65, which is on the west side of the E1 draw. And you can see the field of fire the Germans have there. It's wide open. It's easy. There's no place to hide, really. And to attack at low tide is going to put you into that situation. So I wanted to give you that aspect of it. Also, you can see that the bunker there appears to be covered with a tarp. So that was part of its camouflage that is going to be basically blown away. And then the key thing here, now this is the day after. Notice everybody is walking single file. And the reason they're walking single file is because that area is still festooned with mines. You cannot walk off that path without risking stepping on a shoe mine or activating a bouncing Betty. That says a lot about mines to me. Well, I want to talk about these guys, and they're the Naval Combat Demolition Units. These people are the forerunners of today's Navy SEALs. The Navy SEALs today refer to these men as the Frog Fathers, and they were trained to destroy beach obstacles. Now remember, there's all those beach obstacles out there that are above water right now. They're going to land 16 teams of these Naval Combat Demolition Units, and they're called GAP teams. And there's going to be 7 Navy people and 5 Army engineers. And the idea is that they will blow these obstacles up and make lanes through them, 16 lanes, because once the water comes up, landing craft need a place to get in without being hit by teller mines and getting snagged up on obstacles. And so they're going to do this. They're going to blow these gaps. They got 1 hour basically to do this before the tide starts rising too much. Well, think about this. They weren't supposed to land and being under total direct fire. They were supposed to be landing right after the first wave, and the first wave was supposed to be suppressing the Germans, to be knocking out those bunkers, to be marching up those draws, to be capturing those things and keeping the Germans occupied. Germans aren't occupied. The Germans are keeping those guys down on the shelf, but these guys are wide open. They're out on the beach working under fire. I mean, and there's another problem is some soldiers refuse to advance. So since they refuse to advance, they got to shag them out of there in order to blow up the obstacles because they're hiding behind the obstacles trying to avoid German fire. Incredible, incredible bravery on these guys' part to be out there without cover, trying to do a job. They do manage to create 5 of the 16 gaps, and they open 3 partial gaps. In order to do that, 31 are killed of the Navy and 60 are wounded. That's a 52% casualty rate I can't get you a good number on the Army engineers because they're mixed in with other Army engineer units, but I'd say minimally they had 40% casualties, minimally. Well, the admiral in charge, his name is John Hall, and he says this about these guys. He goes, how do we get such brave and fearless men? Because that's what it took to do this job. They were brave and fearless. So I wanted to point out these guys because I think they did an amazing job at Omaha Beach and deserve recognition. That brings us to someone I told you I would talk about was Lieutenant Jimmy Monteith. And I heard about Jimmy Monteith for the first time when I was walking Omaha Beach with author historian John McManus, and he told us about Jimmy, and it said a lot to me. And I could talk about so many people, and there's so many people that'll never be recognized here, but just going to use Jimmy. Now, Jimmy's recommended for the Medal of Honor. And General Bradley says, well, maybe we shouldn't give him the Medal of Honor. Maybe we should just give him the Distinguished Service Cross. Eisenhower looks at what Jimmy accomplished that day, and he says this man was good, and gives Jimmy the Medal of Honor, unfortunately, posthumously. Well, you can see here that Jimmy, he's got running one of those boats. Okay, so he's got one LCVP, that's his group. He's part of Company L. That's 32 guys Jimmy's got, and the Company L is about 200. They land at Fox Red Beach. Because of that current, they've moved a mile east of where they're supposed to land. No one's supposed to land at Fox Red Beach because Fox Red Beach basically isn't a beach. At high tide, the water literally comes right up to the bluff. So now Monteith and Company L and his guys have got to march across the beach, heading to the west to get back to where they're supposed to be, all this while under fire. They come across two tanks that are on the beach that are buttoned up. In other words, they got all their hatches closed. They can't really see, and they're not being effective. Monteith's commanding officer runs out there to try to get their attention. He's shot down. Monteith runs out, takes his place, beats on the tanks, gets their attention, leads them on foot through a minefield, under fire the whole time, gets them in position, and tells them, you need to shoot there, etc. And they begin to offer covering fire for his group. Monteith then, as you can see the arrow, he moved across the beach, and now they're going to move up the F1 draw. The tanks are giving them covering fire. They begin to move up the F1 draw, and they begin to put stress on the position of WN-60. WN-60 is manned by 40 Germans. Not a lot, but again, they're in bunkers. But also WN-60 has an observation post and is directing artillery fire on the beach. So it's a critical position and we'll see how important this position actually is. Monteith puts them under stress so they can't fire down onto the beach. He also is able to continue to advance and make it so other people in Company L can get up and begin to attack WN-60. He moves past WN-60. This is at 8 a.m. He landed at 6:30 about. And what happens next is the Germans launch a major counterattack at 8:30 a.m. And Monteith is what's blocking that counterattack. Again, the ability for the Germans to reinforce these positions. Monteith's group is basically cut off. He goes from position to position. He destroys 2 machine gun nests with rifle grenades. His unit's about to be surrounded. He tries to get them organized to lead them out to get back to the main part of Company L. He destroys another machine gun nest, and then while running from position to position, Monteith is cut down and killed. It's a sad situation, but what he has accomplished is he has blunted this German counterattack. He's kept them from reinforcing WN-60, and WN-60 will become basically inoperable at 9 a.m. because of the rest of Company L. And so they would no longer be able to direct artillery fire from WN-60. This is a critical piece. This little group, again, this is less than 200 guys because they've taken casualties, manages to take out this bunker. And again, the tanks can't get up the draw. It's too steep. I've told you about. F1 is an amphitheater, so they didn't have tank support. Well, why does this resonate so much with me? Why did I choose to pick Monteith's story when there's so many I could talk about? And that's because of this. Picture on the left I took from the top of Mount Suribachi on the island of Iwo Jima when I attended the 2019 Reunion of Honor. And that's what it looks like from Mount Suribachi down on the beach where the Marines landed. Notice the similarities of the position at WN-60 in relationship to Omaha Beach. And when I got up there, that's all I could think about is this is the same thing as Suribachi. It's so critical to take this. Now, yes, Suribachi was vastly better defended than WN-60. The Marines land on Iwo on February 19th. They don't take Suribachi until the 23rd, so it's 5 days later. But Jimmy and his little group, they managed to knock WN-60 out at 9 in the morning. That's a critical piece. And it really said a lot to me personally about when I got up there. And again, none of that foliage would be there. So they could shoot down on the beach, could call in artillery fire, etc. So said a lot to me really about Jimmy. Well, another person I want to talk about is this gentleman. And that's Sergeant Waverly Woodson Jr. And he's with the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion. Now, I would venture to say that not too many people know that African Americans landed on D-Day at 9 in the morning. I think that's probably a surprise to most of you because you never see them in the movies. They're certainly not in Longest Day or Saving Private Ryan. But this group landed on D-Day at 9 in the morning. Now, was that a good idea? No. Because quite honestly, just in case you don't know what a barrage balloon is, a barrage balloon is a large balloon that you hoist up with cables and attach to the ground, and it floats over an area, and the idea is to protect that area from low-flying aircraft. It's basically an obstacle in the sky. The last thing they need on Omaha Beach at 9 in the morning is a bunch of barrage balloons. That's not what they need. But again, everything's on this schedule. Everything's got to be, well, you got to send this in, you got to send this in, you got to send this in. It's all on time. And Waverly Woodson is a medic. And he's on an LCT, and the tide's coming up, and his LCT hits one of those teller mines, and it detonates, and it's heavily damaged. It's also hit by artillery fire. He's wounded. He's hit in the thigh and in the back and the groin. And he manages to struggle ashore, but he's a medic and he's going to take care of guys. And he does that. And he begins to take care of 200 soldiers is the estimate. And remember, as the tide keeps coming up, people that are wounded that can't get off the beach, they have to drag them up. He amputates a foot. He does all this stuff. I mean, finally, at 4 p.m. the next day, he passes out from exhaustion and from his wounds. So for 30 hours, he did this job as a combat medic. Well, he's recommended for the Medal of Honor, and it's denied. I would say partially because of being African American, to be quite honest with you. And he is approved for the Purple Heart, which he does get. He's then approved for a Bronze Star, which he never receives until after his death, 18 years. He, at the same token, is approved for a Combat Medical Badge. I mean, let's be honest, this guy was a combat medic. There's no question of that. But that's after his death. And then finally, last year, he is given the Distinguished Service Cross. I think it's pretty sad the way this was recognized, but he is finally recognized at least. Now, post-war, he goes on to a very distinguished career. He wants to be a doctor, but unfortunately is not able to get into medical school, but gets a degree in biology and then goes on to work at Bethesda Hospital as basically a supervisor of operating rooms. So he has a very good career post-war. But again, I just don't think that African Americans, we don't think of them even being there, and I don't think he was treated very well for his bravery. There is a new exhibit at the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, and that new exhibit is called Fighting for the Right to Fight. It talks about the African American experience in World War II. Waverly is featured there, and I was lucky enough to walk this thing with the curator, who's Corey Graff, and Corey Graff and I walked this thing. It was very, very nicely done. So if you should get to New Orleans before August, I would highly recommend you view this at the museum. Also, the good news is it's supposed to go on the road. So perhaps it'll come somewhere near to Auburn, hopefully, maybe Tuskegee. And you'll be able to see this exhibit without having to go all the way to New Orleans, but highly recommend it. Well, the situation is not good on Omaha Beach. There's a few little groups that have broken through. For example, there's one boatload of soldiers under a Lieutenant Spaulding that has gotten up the bluff. They've managed amazingly to get through the minefield, through the barbed wire. They do take some severe casualties, actually from a Polish machine gunner. And they get up there, and they're going to attack WN-64 from the rear. Another group that I would love to talk about in more detail, but don't have time, is a group under a Captain Dawson. That is a company, Company G, and they get up on the bluff, and they're going to go to the town of Colleyville. And again, they're going to prevent the Germans from reinforcing that beach. But when we think about it, this is one little boat of 32 guys with casualties. Company G is 200 guys. They've had 63 casualties, so there's not a lot of combat power. And then you've got Company L. That's the only guys that are off the beach. Everybody else is still pinned down on that shingle. And one of the key people, and again, you could, if you're interested, look up General Dutch Coda. He's from the 29th Division. He does a fantastic job trying to get people off this beach. But I want to talk about this gentleman, Brigadier General Willard Wyman. Wyman lands at 0838, I believe, 39. And he sees the mess. He sees that things are going very poorly. And what his job is he's the assistant division commander for the 1st Division. And he is in communication with the commander of the division, General Hubner. And he's trying to get people off the beach, and he sees that things aren't going well. He gets in radio communication with Hubner and says this: "There are too many vehicles on the beach. Send combat troops," because the beach is getting more and more packed with things they don't need, like barrage balloons. Okay? And at the same time, there's a Navy beachmaster, and that Navy beachmaster also sees this chaos, and he says, "Stop all landings." So in other words, they're going to stop the landing completely. That's a huge problem. And then the Navy starts to think, well, maybe we should forget about Omaha Beach completely and begin to take these troops to Utah where it's successful. Wyman, because of contacting Hubner makes the decision, we need infantry. And he sends in the 18th Infantry Regiment. Well, also what's going to happen is they're going to send in, surprisingly, the 29th Division makes the same decision, and they send an infantry regiment in. Now you've got all this extra combat power of people that are actually trained to do the job that needs to be done, which is take those draws, because no draws are taken yet. And so they land about 10:45. They're still pinned down, though, because WN-65 is still a problem. WN-64 has been neutralized by that little tiny group by Spaulding, surprisingly. And this is where the Navy comes involved, and I'll give them credit. There's so much involvement of the Navy that we don't really have time, particularly these destroyers. But this one in particular is the USS Frankfurt. The guys on the shore, the soldiers, see the Frankfurt coming in, and they think, "Oh my goodness, it's been hit by a torpedo or a mine. They're gonna beach it so it doesn't sink." Right at the last second, the Frankfurt turns. It's literally within 1,800 yards of the beach, which is point blank range for naval fire. But the Frankfurt can't see any, they don't have radio communication with anybody. But what they can see is there's a tank on the beach and a 37 millimeter anti-aircraft gun that is firing on a position, which just happens to be WN-65. And they think, aha, that must be where the Germans are. And they begin to deluge the Germans with fire from that destroyer. 5-inch shells, 55 pounds roughly. Now, can those 5-inch shells penetrate that feet of concrete? No, they can't. But what they can do is they can give the Germans in those bunkers a hell of a headache. And they blast that thing with everything they have. And then as soon as they lift fire, the Germans are so stunned that all those troops that have just landed can take WN-65, can begin to get up that draw, and then the engineers can start to dig a path because there's no road in that draw, E1 draw. They'll dig a path, and at 3 p.m., vehicles can get off that beach. Finally a draw is open. So that beach no longer is just going to be a kill zone. They can begin to advance with tanks and trucks and everything they need to advance further in. And that's the critical moment of Omaha Beach, in my opinion. That is when the difference was made between defeat and victory at Omaha, when they get that draw. They have to have it. I forget his name, to be honest with you.
What meritorious medals or what?
Oh,
recognize
the first division gave all the destroyers. There were several that did this. They gave all those destroyers great kudos. If you ever go to the First Division Museum in Wheaton, Illinois, if you get there, you'll see that they talk about those destroyers and how much of an aid they were. But I can't remember what the captain's name was off the top of my head. But anyway, the cost of victory. This is a huge, huge, huge loss. You can see here on the beach, destroyed tank, destroyed trucks. You can still see numerous German beach obstacles that aren't cleared. There's actually still some dead on the beach you could see there. And there's a lot of reasons why this was successful. One of the biggest reasons, of course, being is that we had overwhelming force, we had surprise, we had well-trained troops, and critically, the Germans never completed their defenses. But the casualties are very, very high, about 4,700 casualties, according to Balakowski. And when I looked up, best I could figure out was perhaps as many as 2,000 were killed in action at Omaha Beach. This is a tremendous amount of casualties. But they persevered. They captured that beach. They made Omaha a success. And I will use this gentleman here. His name is Major Carl Plitt, and he said this: the plan for Operation Neptune, that's the naval plan for Omaha, was a good one, but didn't work. It was the individual courage and heroism of the American soldier that won the beaches on June of 1944, and I couldn't agree more. These little groups braving that fire, taking this beach. So I said initially that this was a battle that changed our world. And why do I say that? Because quite honestly, the fact that we succeed at Normandy puts a large number of combat power, Western democratic combat power, on the European continent. We go on from Normandy, we break out of Normandy, I believe, the middle of late July, And by winter time, we're all the way to the German border, the Rhine River. We are up into Belgium. We are in the Netherlands. Haven't completely captured all that, but we've advanced. That spring of 1945, we will go over the Rhine. We will crush a German force, a huge force, an army group, basically, and advance to the Elbe River. When we advance to the Elbe River, that's where we will meet the Soviets. That will be the border of the Cold War. Very important to understand, too, is we will also have an occupation army in West Germany. So there'll be an East Germany under communist control and a West Germany under democratic British sort of control. So the West Germans, well, this will be a buffer zone between Western Europe and communist Europe. That's a reason I feel this is so important. Well, now I'm going to digress into something I'm usually loath to do, and that's talk about what if. And so what if D-Day fails? What if it never happens at all? Well, simply this. Omaha could fail, and the reason Omaha could fail, again, we've seen. But if it does fail, what does that do? Well, first of all, it creates, remember, it's a 50-mile beach. Omaha is right in the middle. So that beach becomes a gap. Now they've got the British in the east, you got the Americans in the 82nd, 101st in the west, and the Germans can theoretically defeat those groups in detail. In other words, they can concentrate their force on each one individually. Big problem. Also, don't forget that Omaha was going to be a key logistics base. It was going to have that Mulberry Harbor. So now there's going to be a huge amount of loss of logistics if we don't control Omaha Beach. Well, another key thing that's I think is important is Germany's allies, what few they have left, Hungary, Romania, Slovakia, etc., they're all beginning to defect. They're throwing in the towel. This probably would have given them a little bit more reason to stay a little bit longer. Well, that's the issue with Omaha fails. What happens if it never happens at all? And how could that be? Well, the Germans in 1943 have developed something called the pressure mine, the pressure naval mine. And had they made a lot of these, which they don't, and had they deployed them, they could have been extremely effective in preventing our ability to invade France at that time. So how does this work? You take one of these naval mines and you put it on the bottom of the ocean. You can drop it from a plane. You can dump it off a ship. The channel is not particularly deep. And certainly to get into ports is not particularly deep. So you put these things on the seabed. When a ship comes over, the pressure differential of that ship detonates this mine. So the Germans had the technology, could have deployed them had they put the effort into it, which instead they probably built V-2 rockets, which was a great technology, but not a particularly war-winning effort. This would have helped them. Now, why do I say this? Because the United States does the exact same thing to the Japanese in 1945. We deploy pressure mines dropped by B-29 bombers all over the ports and coast of Japan. These mines are not being able to be swept. They're unsweepable, but the technology available at that time. So consequently, what happens is we basically paralyze Japanese shipping on the ports, on the inland sea, and sink hundreds and damage hundreds of Japanese ships using these mines. Could have done the same thing. And that was called Operation Starvation. And it was probably one of the most successful things done in World War II by anybody.
Right, excuse me, I've just got to stand up and go. I only mean that. Now, there's an insult, but it was wonderful, but I've got to go.
I get there. Almost done.
If
It's okay.
D-Day failed, then where does the United States use its nuclear weapon?
We're getting there. All right, so it fails, right? Now, my opinion is this, that after Bagration, on the Soviet offensive on Bagration, there is no way that the Germans would win the war. And I apologize for this graphic. It's a little melodramatic, I must admit. But that's the point. So if Bagration is such a defeat for the Germans, they can't win the war. Also, we are continuing to give the Soviets tanks and trucks and trains and jeeps and all this stuff that they need to be a mobile army. So that continues to go on too. Well, we are also going to continue to do strategic bombing. So the 8th Air Force Bomber Command by the British, all these planes are going to continue to burn German cities to the ground, destroy German factories. None of that's going away. So Germany can't win the war, in my opinion. It's impossible. But what will happen is a couple things. Is the war most likely will go on longer. And if the war goes on longer, to your point, sir, if it goes on into August of 1945, there's a very good possibility that the first atomic weapon will be dropped in Europe, not in Asia, not at Hiroshima. So that brings up the specter of nuclear weapons being used in Germany and, of course, being used in Europe. But now we've got that issue. The other issue is, if we don't have boots on the ground in massive quantities in France, we are not going to get into Germany. And so when the war ends, do we have West Germany? Very possibly not. So you'll see the Soviets then would be on the border of France at the Rhine River, for example. Again, speculation, but certainly possible if we don't have that combat power. And of course, there'll be no occupation army, because the occupation army, there's nobody to occupy because the Soviets are occupying the Germans. So we can't very well station an army in France. I don't think the American public would stand for that. Why do we have soldiers in France? So that's going to be a huge dynamic change for the Cold War. And I'll use a couple of quick examples. Poland. Soviet behavior in Poland is just outrageous. Okay. Pre-war, remember, they're the allies of the Germans in 1939 and help invade Poland. In 1940, there's what's known as the Katyn massacre. So the Soviets basically murdered 22,000 Polish military officers, police, intelligentsia, etc., because they want a Soviet Poland. Well, the Poles have done the best thing they can for World War II. Many of them fight on the side of the British. There's 2 divisions in Italy. There's a division in Normandy. They've got naval forces. They've got paratroopers that fight at Arnhem. Post-war, they can't go back to Poland because they're viewed by the Polish Soviet government as enemies of the people and reactionaries. So over 100,000 stay in England, many come to the United States. So Poland is basically becomes dominated by the Soviets. I think a very good possibility that Germany would be as well. And that leaves us with France. In 1945, in the fall of 1945, after the war, the first French election, 26.2% of the vote goes for the Communist Party. They are the largest single party in France in 45. In 46, in November, the Communists win again. They get 28.2% of the vote. The United States is extremely concerned that France is going to go communist, particularly Undersecretary of State Dean Acheson and many people in the Truman administration. So there's that fear that they will become communist. We put severe pressure on the French to basically expel the communists from their government. So much so that in 47, we tell the French, if you don't expel the communists, we won't give you any Marshall Plan aid. And they do the same thing in Italy as well. Now, this causes, when they do expel them, it causes massive strikes and massive discord in France. Think about the fact if that was going on with the Soviet army on the border of France, things could have been vastly different. And so that's why I say it's so important that we had D-Day, and it certainly shaped our world. And I thank you all for coming to that.